AI agents are one of the hottest topics right now, and if you're looking to get some hands-on experience but don't know where to start, stay tuned because in this video, I'm gonna show you how to get started with Microsoft's AI Agent Builder, which is called Copilot Studio. By the end of this video, you're gonna understand and have the tools and knowledge to be able to confidently set up your own agent. And I'm gonna actually show you two real business examples that we're gonna step through as part of the learning experience. The first of which is a loan analyzer agent that allows you to take in a form submission from an outside third party and analyze that submission detail with knowledge and data within the company to evaluate if it should be approved or rejected and send out email correspondence accordingly. The second application we're going to look through is an access evaluator for third-party apps within the business that actually allows you to leverage and integrate to the Approvals app in Microsoft Teams and communicate with an agent in Teams to send approval requests for application access, which can be approved or rejected, and then a ticket is created with IT to facilitate that access. So lots to unpack here in today's video, but we're gonna be stepping through everything, including the licensing considerations. So let's go ahead and dive into that now as we start and kick off this session on getting started with Copilot Studio. Before we get started here, just a quick introduction. My name's Nick. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I create content around Microsoft and the SMB space. You can check out more of my content on this channel and at my blog at t-365.com. So before we dive into the demo and stepping you through step-by-step how to create an agent in Copilot Studio, first want to revisit something I covered last week really quickly here around why should you invest your time in learning more about AI agents and what's the possibility of them disrupting our lives in the future. So I think, the main thing here when we talk about AI agents is kind of displacing traditional SaaS. Satya Nadella mentioned that last week's video, but when we talk about these diagrams here, just to quickly run through in a high level, traditional SaaS applications like we use for our ticketing system, our CRM tools, even, our day-to-day productivity tools like Teams and Outlook, leverage this front end that users interact with. They're clicking on things, clicking on buttons, adding text. And then based off those user interactions, there's some business logic performed, which if you really simplify it at its highest degree, we're just doing these capabilities of reading, creating, updating deleted data in some backend database. And that's oversimplifying it to a large degree, but it's fundamentally what the majority of SaaS applications that we're using today. And if you think about it, we're using many. There's a proliferation of SaaS apps since we moved to cloud. And when we're talking about agents, we're talking about shifting that business logic into the agent itself and these large language models that are baked into the AI engine that supports it as well too. So we would move into a state where you're just using natural language to chat with an agent. You have those user interactions, which is just describing what you want to get done. And then there's no code involved. It's simply just taking that, generating the logic to be able to update a backend database with open APIs that are available via a connection to that application. So the use case that we have here for the orchestration layer is really kind of orchestrating tasks across applications that you would normally interface with one by one, or you've manually set up some type of integration that's very fixed in the sense of what it can do because you're saying, if A happens, do B, and then so forth. And it is not leaving a lot of room for flexibility, if that makes sense. So the use case I gave here is the sales rep example of somebody who's having a meeting with a prospect here. They want to take the meeting notes to generate a proposal in Word, and then they want to update the contact record in HubSpot with those notes and maybe add some additional fields to the metadata of that contact. And then they want to flag it in MailChimp for a particular marketing campaign to back the proposal. And normally speaking, that's, very manual today. The user's doing that and performing those actions, which is also very time consuming. When we talk about AI agents, they could actually orchestrate this across the board with being able to simply just have a conversation, with the agent. Again, no code is involved in creating that business logic to go and perform all of those tasks. So that's very important to understand. And I think when we talk about these agents, and you'll see a couple different examples here, they can either be fully asynchronous and autonomous, meaning you don't really have to chat with it. You don't have to
communicate to derive certain actions, you could just simply say there's a trigger. And we're going to see that when we get into our loan application or loan analyzer app or agent, where it is based off of a trigger of a user submitting this loan application to us and then performing these other events based off of the prompts that we've given to and instructions we've given to that agent. The other interaction here is obviously there's internal agents you could create that maybe look at your business data. A common example would be FAQs around your HR benefits, policies, things like that, that often it's very time consuming to answer, eats up a lot of time for HR that could be working on other things, or you're just not very staffed in HR is a very common use case as well. And then there's your externally facing agents that might be at its very, most commonly used layer, a support bot that answers FAQs, that can reference articles, that could then, open tickets for you, or, really facilitate other components of a task, like facilitating actions in your actual application that you offer to your downstream customers. So there's a lot here to consider with that, but as we take a look at the examples, that'll become more clear, just walking you through. I just wanted to cover this though to illustrate why you should be spending time with this. I think it's going to have a huge impact in how we work. Okay, so next here we're going to get into the licensing and subscription model for this and being able to interact with agents and what that looks like. At the time of this recording, Microsoft's recently introduced a new freemium model that you can see here with Copilot Chat, and this allows users to interact with Copilot in a chat-like function for free. And then they've introduced this metered billing for interacting with agents. So the main delineation here is that you do get a active subscription to Copilot Studio, which is what we're looking at here today, as part of an ongoing Copilot subscription. These today are annual prepaid or annual paid monthly, as far as the $30 per user per month. And you do have delineations in pricing depending on if you do annual prepaid or annual paid monthly. But the main thing here for the meter billing that we're talking about for your agents, they have this other one here that says use agents that act independently using autonomous actions. And they have that meter billing here under even the paid subscription for Copilot for 365 there. And that, at the time of this recording, might do a future video on that, is still underway as far as what that actually means and the delineation here. I'm going to work through, these agents grounded in work data, and then, some of the autonomous actions that they'll create. Microsoft does have this article that, they kind of reference here, and it looks like the consumption of this is 1 cent per message, but there's different types of messages or features that they're saying is in Copilot Studio, and, tenant graph grounding for messages, if you were to query it once, is equivalent to 30 messages. So there's a lot of asterisks with this. I think the billing is really messy when we talk about this metered side of the house, and we'll have to see more here starting in February of 2025. At the time of this recording, it's closer to the end of January for me. So I'll link this below so you can see more of that, but just take that in mind, or take that as far as, understanding that there's going to be more to come here around the pricing. I think you're pretty safe though if you're already using Microsoft Copilot for 365 and have an active subscription for that. To get started creating your first AI agent, there's a couple locations you could do this. The first of which is in the Copilot Chat experience, which is now again part of that freemium model that I was just talking about. You can go to it by going to m365.cloud.microsoft that you can see up here at the top. And over on the right hand side, you have this ability to create an agent. The big thing here is they do give you a couple of templates you can use to get started. And then you have this configure tab, which gives you the ability to build your own custom agent here. The main thing though is that this is a lightweight experience today. As you can see, some of these sections say coming soon. And for that reason, we want to go ahead and head into this Copilot Studio that gives us more of the full-fledged experience, at least at this point in time. This is copilotstudio.microsoft.com. And this is, if you haven't ever accessed this before, something that will prompt you, if you don't have an active Copilot subscription, to sign up for a trial. And you can use this for free. You don't have to put a credit card down. You don't have to prepay annually like we saw for Copilot when that first came out. And still today, you don't get a trial of Microsoft 365 Copilot up until most recently, where we have the freemium experience now too. So within here, you can see that we have a lot of different template agents that they built. And I think this is helpful just to help you understand kind of some use cases that maybe gets you brainstorming about what you could use within your organization. But I would encourage you to think about common repetitive tasks, time-consuming tasks that you could maybe automate completely, whether that's interactions with individuals inside or outside your company, or just simply triggers. And the trigger we're going to look at today is someone submitting us that loan application, and basically being able to evaluate whether or not against our data, if that should be approved, and then sending an approval or rejection email with the analysis. So within agents here, you'll be able to see the ones that you've created, and under create, you'll be able to see more of the templates that Microsoft has. And you see a lot of these are coming soon at the time of this recording, but we can also go in and start to add our own new agent, which takes you through this chat experience. You can actually skip over this and just go straight into configuration. But I like this as well too, because you can begin to give the agent, a prompt of really what you would want as far as the building blocks goes. You could say something like, I want an agent that can review form submissions for loan applications and evaluate if it should be approved or rejected based on an internal KB article. And so this is not that verbose. I would encourage you, the more verbose you get, the better the results. But you can customize that. You can tweak it and test it, as we'll see here as we continue through this demo. But effectively here, it's going to begin, as you'll see here on the right-hand side, to start to derive instructions for the actual agent that it's going to leverage. And you'll notice natively I'm not filtering this out. There is a lot of bugginess still today with this functionality. I mean, this recently came out. So it's just an interesting, component here that you have to deal with, I think, in the early stages for what we're looking at. And then, it's giving you kind of those instructions and summarizing them over here. And it's like, hey, should we call this the loan application reviewer? And I can say, yes, that sounds good. And I want you to notice here, the right-hand side, this just says agent right now. And if we say, yes, that sounds good, it's actually going ahead and updating this to loan application reviewer. So it's going to continue on with this back and forth to get more and more dialogue for you. And it's really doing that to enhance the instructions we have over here. So what we're going to do here is, we're going to say after the loan has been reviewed, I want to send an email to the applicant with a detailed response on why they were approved or rejected in this case. And this will go ahead and, update these instructions again and add this other one on here. And then it's going to continue to keep going back and forth there. And at any point in time, you can simply say create, and it's going to go ahead and create based off of what's been said so far. Or you can just click on skip to configure, and that'll kind of blow away everything you've chatted about here. So we're going to click on create, and this is going to go ahead and set up that agent for us. And we're going to be able to see that here in just a minute. This popped up right away. It's still loading the description and the instructions over here, but you have this test your agent, which is already providing, kind of this default prompt from a topic, which we'll get into as well. And it's generated these instructions for us. And it's kind of a step-by-step instruction list. Whenever you're creating this as a best practice, I want you to think about this like you were training an employee to say, it's your first day. This is what you're going to do, A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, right? From those perspectives. And then we're going to walk through, more of these actions and triggers, that we're going to have as part of this within here. And then I'm going to skip ahead just for the sake of time to show you one that I've already built so you can understand more about kind of that engagement there. The first thing though, by default, we have the capabilities here to chat with this bot, just like we can see here, ask the questions, and it'll go through some default topics that are created here as well. Just for what's out of the custom versus the system generated ones. Like when I start a conversation here with this agent as a trigger, then I'm going to send this message. And this message here is going to have this variable, which is the bot name, which is a system variable, which I'll get into a little bit later. and then it's going to have this body, which is what you see over here. So that was the trigger for us in that use case, but let's say we want to have the trigger based off of a certain action. In this case, we're doing it based off of a form submission from Microsoft Forms. It wants us to turn on this generative orchestration to continue, which is basically, leveraging a generative AI model to help with the answers that it provides. So in this case, we're going to say when a new form response is submitted, but I want you to take notice here, if you're familiar with Power Automate, these are a lot of the triggers, that you would be familiar with as part of that experience. It's extending that architecture over. So we could even do more simplistic things like when a new email arrives to our support email box, go look at our FAQ, summarize an answer, send it back to that, submitter as a really raw use case, but really powerful, given that's probably a manual action that many businesses out there are taking today. Same thing, we could do a recurrence, like every day, do this as a trigger for something, or even when files are uploaded in SharePoint. And so we have a lot of triggers here that aren't just first party with Microsoft, they also extend into popular third-party applications, even things like Gmail. So it's a good thing to kind of poke around in here and see what exists. You could also connect your own custom third-party applications. It's a lot more advanced because you need to interact with the APIs and all that, but there's a lot out of the box we can work with. And ideally over time, there's just more native things that we don't require us to interact at all as far as creating the connectors. So in this case, we're saying when a new form is submitted, and this is going to go ahead and sign in, to your access with forms just to make sure you have access to that form. And then you'll be able to go down in here and actually review the, loan application form. So let's take a look at that, and then I'll come back here and show you the rest of the setup actions. So this is the form that we have here. We created this in Microsoft Forms. In the scope of this video, if you don't know Forms, it's basically really easy in the sense of being able to, set up answers and questions here that you're looking for, but really basic form in the sense of, the amount of loan you want, the employment duration you have, your monthly income, purpose, repayment period, your credit score. So there's quite a lot here that just is going to be leveraged by the AI agent and subsequently through our knowledge base to calculate whether or not this should be approved or rejected. In this case too, we're also just using a very basic knowledge base article. It's one document that we're leveraging. You can leverage entire SharePoint document libraries, multiple documents, PDFs, and also third-party or first-party data sources that might be located in Azure, like a full-fledged database. Show that here in a second, but this is basically like our criteria for, a black and white of what we approve, what we don't approve, and even things like debt to income ratio. We're not asking for directly in the loan, but the Copilot agent is actually going to perform that calculation for us based off of the form results. So it's really, a cool use case of being able to set that up. And, this is, again, what you would say is a new hire, and walking them through, okay, when a loan comes through, you'll get this application and you review it, you check it against this to determine, if we should approve it or reject it. And that's everything that's going on behind the scenes. So coming back to Copilot Studio, I want to show you the rest of these steps here. The knowledge that you connect. In this case, I've connected our loan approval criteria, but if I add that here, all I did was add a custom file here, which is just that file that we're leveraging. You can scrape public websites, whether they're yours or a third party, to try to find answers. They may have FAQs on those sites that you could leverage. You can leverage an entire SharePoint document repository or browse files within SharePoint, which is really powerful, just to have a lot of that knowledge base that you might have. A good example might be where you store a lot of your HR documentation that has a lot of FAQs that you get all the time. And then, even, Dataverse, if you leverage that. And then in the advanced sources here, we have some really popular third-party tools for ticketing and, CRM like Salesforce and ServiceNow. But then naturally being able to connect to a SQL database in Azure is also a possibility. So I've gone ahead and set that up here. We can use it, leverage it. And then for our actions here, when we talk about actions within Copilot, this is, again, really flowing from, Power Automate in the sense of the actions and hooks that we have into here. But this is where it gets really powerful as well, too, where we have a library of actions. There's the feature set here, but even if you were to search for some third party like MailChimp, MailChimp is already natively connected in here. So I don't have to do the legwork of, well, what's the API call that we need to make and setting all that up. And certainly there's a limited subset in this library of vendors and third parties, but over time, that'll continue to be at, a little higher library. So in this case, we're actually going to be looking for this Outlook email connector that we would have in here. We would choose this send an email, actual action from here. I've already set that up though. And fundamentally, what you're doing when you set that up is you're creating the connection. We're setting the authentication method here, which you might want to use Copilot Author Authentication if, you want to send from, a specific email address there. As far as, the customization of that goes, you might want to send specifically from, a shared mailbox, something like that as well too, which would be a different action. But in the input section here, you would really say, is this to field required? And this is actually going to dynamically fill that with the best option. So this is the AI model and the Gen AI, kind of doing the analysis to say, well, who's the applicant here? What do they fill out in the contact form that I can pull out and, be able to kind of display that in here. But you could also set this as a fixed value here. Maybe instead of sending a approval or rejection to the loan applicant, we're sending it to a specified team internally that would then take further action. You could really, mix this up as you see fit. And then the outputs there could be defined as well too, that you could modify. It's kind of beyond the scope of this video, but we're going to leave it at those default settings there that we have. So those are the main components that we have within here. We can actually now test this by actually submitting a form and seeing the results come through. You can go down here and test the trigger with this test trigger button here, or up at the top, you can click on these three dots, click on test trigger, and click on when a new response is submitted. So let's actually walk through submitting that form. Let's just say we did that. I'm not going to showcase that fully, but whenever that form is submitted, we have past occurrences here that I've done. If we click on start testing now, this is actually going to run through and it's going to start checking into our knowledge sources here based off the form details that we got. And it looked over our form approval criteria as part of this. And then if we continue to wait here, it should be sending out that email to the applicant with that approval or the rejection. So in this case, it dynamically filled these values in here already for us. And in this particular case, we have the Dear Nicholas loan application decision, and then NROS, which is what was specified in the form submission for the applicant that submitted this. If we take a look at our email now too, we see that that email came through to the applicant. The subject line was auto-generated as that application decision. And then we have this rejection, that we got here because the amount, was for 115 million in this case. And, it's kind of outlining here, this is the reasons why, this was failed in this particular case. And this is all referencing the actual document from our KB article that we got as well too, that really went through and, performed that action. Now, the interesting thing here, I always like to be authentic about, the good and the bad of this. Like, this is seemingly really good, but let's flip to the, not so great side. So if I actually refresh this and I said, let's do this again, and let's just test this trigger. What I've mostly found, if I submit the same exact form, with the same exact details, I might actually get an entirely different result. So let's, in the sense of, the details, not necessarily like the approval or rejection, but actually looking at that email again, we'll see what the second one looks like. I'm doing this live too. I'm not going to edit it, just so you guys can see the difference here. And as you notice here, it actually spat out this information, and it's asking us now, would you like me to send this detailed analysis to your email? So this is interesting because it gave us more of the detail of why it would pass or fail. It's giving us the calculations for like debt to income ratio and giving us a lot more here, but it didn't actually go and take that action. It's just asking us now. So we're going to say yes. But my main problem with this is that I want this to run asynchronously. I don't want to be able or to have to chat with it, when we get that through to say, yeah, let's process this. And now it went ahead and processed the application, Subject line is different. So again, if you wanted this to be fixed every time, you could set it as a fixed value. But then let's take a look at that description again now, or the body of that email, to see what changed. So if you take a look here, it did factor in now a much more verbose email, same exact form that was submitted here. And we could work on some formatting issues. I'm not going to worry about that right now because it's kind of ugly just as a fat paragraph. But the other thing that you'll notice between this last email and the first one is that this has it in pounds, and I didn't designate anything in pounds, as part of that. So it's kind of interesting that it got that confused. So there's a little bit, what I found as far as resolving this problem is going back into our studio here, going to the overview and adding more and more very specific instructions. So the more detail that you get as part of these instructions, the more of a consistent response you're going to see as well too, as far as the calculations, the designation of currency, whatever that might look like, or even if you want to say summarize it in 3 sentences, put it into a bulleted list. Those all would work here as far as, just getting a more consistent response that you would see from, this activity that we're generating within here. The other call out here that I want to walk through is just that I did have to modify the action here, or the trigger, as far as what happens behind the scenes. So whenever you create this trigger, what's going to happen is that a Power Automate flow is going to be created automatically for you. So it's basically giving you a front end, but when I click into here, I'll actually see this Power Automate flow, and I'll be able to see, kind of the chain of events of going from a form submission into a, information back to the prompt for the Copilot agent itself. Now, the one thing that, happened was that it just had these 2 actions, the first and last one here when it was created, and all that was doing was passing in the form ID. So it wasn't actually taking in any of these response details, meaning all the field forms and answers that the user submitted. It was just submitting a form ID to say, hey, it was done. And so that's not intuitively what I would expect to have happen from a form. I know Power Automate really well, so I was able to come in here and just add these extra steps to basically take all the details, pass them into a variable that gets passed into the actual agent, that gets submitted. But, this is something that I feel like is part of that, bugginess at the beginning here. You would think that if you submit a form, you would just take in the details and be able to see it. By the time you're watching this video, that might have already been fixed from Microsoft as something that you could take a look at, or maybe I'm missing something, but by default, it would not find the information. So that's just another call out here. As you're getting used to these things, there might be some additional troubleshooting that you have to go through just because it is so new. I'll do more videos over time of these specific use cases where I find value, in showing you a workaround or something like that. But it's important to keep that in mind as you're kind of test driving this versus using it in production. Okay, so the second agent that I'm going to show you that I built here is this approval assistant. It kind of skipped ahead of, the instructions and walking through the initial setup here. And I'm going to walk through this a little bit faster just for the sake of time for this video. But the main thing here is we're not connecting to any knowledge for this chatbot. We are simply using it to run a specific Power Automate flow for approvals. And then, we're going to go ahead and shoot it off into an email as well. So I'll finalize it with that. We don't have necessarily any triggers. The triggers are actually going to come through the topics. So mostly with this agent, I want to show you how to modify topics to take in request. And then I want to show you the Power Automate connection, as well as how you can publish this into Microsoft Teams. So within here, this agent is really, going to take in those requests and kind of chat with the user to gather what app do you need access to and why at a fundamental layer. And we're in doing this in the sense of like a SOC 2 type of compliance for making sure we have our approval requests documented and in a fluid fashion. But if you think about this, normally this is a ticket that goes to IT. IT has to reach out to somebody who owns an application in a lot of cases, or request a manager to approve that user getting added into the app, because you're talking about potential billing change or what access they need for security purposes. So it's very time intensive. And this is a great use case for an agent that is, very specific on what it can do there. So in this case, we've got an action set up. Whenever you add an action in here, you can say, run flow or run a flow from a Copilot agent. And this will take you into creating a actual Power Automate flow. If I click into here, it'll pull me to this action, and then I'll say run from a Copilot agent. And if I click on edit, this is basically what you'll see. And I'll do a different video on actually, really integrating to Power Automate in the sense of, what we're doing here. This basic example though. So this is the actions that it'll create here by default. I created this one for the approval requests that'll go into Teams, but fundamentally here, you're going to have your request name, your description, your approver, and your requester. And these are all parameters that I set here. So this is again looking through what is the request that you're accessing? What's the name of this request? Like I need access into Azure, or I need access into MailChimp. What's the description? What access do you need? Things like that. Who should approve it? And then who are you, right? In general.
So after we have our Power Automate action configured back in Copilot Studio, if you go back to topics here, we're going to click into conversation start, because this is where we have the trigger, for every time that you see here, where we have our automated message here. We have our appropriate terminator quote here for the bot that's reaching out to us. But the next thing that we're doing here, when you click on these, you have some drop downs in the sense of the flow that you can create with this chatbot, and you could send a message, you could ask a question, adaptive card, add conditions. There's a lot to cover here, but for the sake of this kind of being an initial tutorial, what we're going to do here is talk about variable management and then asking questions. So in this particular case, what we need is we need the variables to pass into those parameters as part of our Copilot action, so that it knows who's the requester, who's the approver that we want to reach out to send into that approver action that we created on the Power Automate side. So within here, you would basically say, hey, I want to ask a question, which is what we did here. And then from the identify section, you'll see a lot of components in here for various options. In this case, we're going to keep it simple. There's a lot of complexity that you get into when you talk about everything that's available, but we're saying we want the entire user's response. So you could actually try to extract things from their responses, and that's a lot more sophisticated. But in this case, we're just saying like, take it one for one. And in this case, we're asking them, what's the name of the approval? And we've created what's known as a variable within here, and we're setting it to whatever they respond with. And we will see that here within the flow. You can test this out, but we're also going to see it within Teams, so that you'll be able to identify what that is. But once we do that, we're getting the description, we're getting the question here as far as their email goes. And one of the other things that we can do here is actually set variables, and we talk about that in variable management. But in this particular case, we're saying the requester here is, and then we have a variable that we can customize and select what it is. Either that's custom, we created these questions for new variables that we wanted to set, but you also have system variables here that relate to the context of the interaction. And so we have a logged in user. You're able to grab things like the system generated email. And if you publish a Teams application, they are going to be an authenticated user, in this case natively. So there's nothing custom that you have to do for this. And then, you can add your own questions here. So if I was to just delete this real quick, just for the sake of this demo, and click on something like ask a question, I could say, what is your email? And obviously this is redundant because we're actually just setting it here. You do want to ask less questions, obviously, for them. But you could also, present multiple choice options to the user if that was a particular question. And in this case, though, we're just saying, again, the entire user's response. And then the variable here that we are going in and setting is this email one. But you can set a brand new variable and call it whatever you'd like here if it's not already in the environment. So in this particular case, after we've done that, we're passing in an action. And an action in this case can come from the actions that we've added. And this is the run from a Copilot, run a flow from a Copilot there. It's our Power Automate flow that I just showed you there. And we're basically passing in those parameters that we saw before into that so they can run the flow. And then we're taking this action here of being able to go ahead and pass this into an email request. And so we're actually hard coding the email here to go to our support email, and then we're passing in a subject name of the request name, and then the body here is the description. So you saw in the last example, how we were connecting to this, but this is just another way of setting that up into this topic itself. So just another great view of being able to see that, and then we're sending a message to the user while that flow processes about the actual request being sent. So I'm going to go ahead and save this here. And just a quick note, before you start interacting with teams or anything like that, you would have to publish it here. You can interact with the test account again here. I'm going to go ahead and publish it completely. All right, then from here, I also want to show in this channel section here, this is where you can publish it to various, different mediums. And we are primarily going to look at teams here today, but you could also do things like a custom website. You'll notice though that if you try to go to custom website, it wants you to modify some of the security settings for authentication. And I'll show that here in a second, but by natively, you can go in and set up a Teams connection here with your own team. You can actually submit this into the admin section of the Teams Admin Center to get it published across the entire organization so people can search for it. But when you're testing though, this is a great place because it'll have you open up the Teams app here and install it. I've actually already got this installed, so it's just saying update now, and I can click on that. And then it will be located here in the app section for me. And so it's got this, hey, you're starting a new conversation. And this, what I'm initiating here is a topic. And the keyword or phrase that I'm using is hello. So if for any reason this gave me a different answer than, kind of directing me to that main conversation starter, I could go actually back into the topic section here within the environment. And I could probably, look for something like, a greeting or something like that that would have that hello conversation kind of traversing through there. So if we go to greeting, you'll notice here that I actually already edited this. And, these are the phrases that would be viewed. And then I'm redirecting it to the conversation start topic, which is what we're using here to go ahead and fulfill this request. So just a little tip there too, just for that. Back here though, chatting with our assistant, we're going to say, hey, the name of this request is access request Azure as an example here. Then it's going to give me, flow through that topic of describe the levels that you've accessed that you need, justifications, additional details. I need access to the SIP resource group for testing and prod. Not a great idea, but that's what I need here. And then who needs to approve this request? I'm just going to say myself here just to show you guys how this is going to work here, but you would send in the request here to who needs to approve it. Maybe that's your manager. And then what happens here is that the approvers app gets kicked off because of the Power Automate action that we added in our agent. This is going to that manager, whoever you designated here. And I could say, hey, this is approved and any other detail. And when I do that, it'll kick off that flow. It'll then respond to the requester with the status of approved here. I'll have that documented, which is great here for, in my case, I referenced Doc again. And then we have our workflows that got kicked off to send a actual message in Teams with the Rickroll based off of that message there too that we had within the Power Automate flow. Let's check and make sure that our email was sent to the support email address as well with the details of the request. So here it is, very simple. Obviously you could do a lot more here, but you have your access request, you have your description, and it's going to that support email address. So very basic, but you can imagine if you pull this apart, you can add and chain a lot of different events in here. If we go back to our Copilot ecosystem, even in the action section here, you can add actions that even span into Entra. So let's say we made this even very specific to one application. If I even simplified it further, you could say if it was approved, add the user to a group, which could be assigned to an Entra app
and they would immediately get access into that application. So it's a pretty powerful experience that you could set up here. Saves a lot of time, but hopefully this example or these examples provided you some maybe creativity around what you could be doing in your organization or the clients that you manage today. Okay, lastly here, guys, just a couple of tips here just from me using this so far. Again, this will probably evolve over time as the product evolves, but also as I get a better understanding, have more use cases to show for you. But one of the best things as far as advice I can give is to make this thing really narrowly focused. It should be just doing a very specific task. You shouldn't ask it to do multiple things as part of its function, meaning maybe let's say you have a support bot, you don't want it to be doing one function as far as maybe responding to emails with certain data, but then also being able to respond to a bunch of different topics, from across different facets of the organization. You want it to have a singular focus that it does as far as the action or what it can return on. That also reduces your internal complexity. The second thing here on top of that, like we saw, is, the more detailed that you make these instructions, the better. And then again, treat it like it's a new employee that you're trying to train up of do this, do this, do this. It's very sequential. It can help that it's using the Gen AI model to kind of reason, have some outside sources to mesh into there. But the more specific you make it in its steps, the better results you are going to see. The other thing here is that you want to test. I know one thing I've noticed, like I showed earlier, is that it's very inconsistent in the sense of the responses. The more data you add here in the instructions, the more consistent it will get. But that is something that, makes me worrisome from the standpoint of pushing this to my customers as an example in a production like application. And lastly, if you're an MSP out there thinking about, well, how do I get my customers into this? What kind of things can I do? There's such a vast area footprint of which it can cover. So there's a couple different areas there. I would try to productize this as uniquely and specifically as I can. So basically taking a look at, can I build an HR app for everybody and productize that, try to sell that as a package? Can I go ahead and try to productize, a website support bot for that company? Can I try to productize, what you saw today, maybe for a bank, for a loan application being submitted? So the more specific you can get, again, with that, and then having repetition to be able to sell that to many customers, that's the other dynamic I would look for, not necessarily specific to one customer, but something you could resell over and over again, because you can within here even export the agent and import it to another environment. So very important to take note on those couple of things just from the standpoint of being able to push this out. And then, if you are doing more of a custom engagement with your customer, I would recommend analyzing their business applications. What specifically do they use for their day-to-day? And again, focus in on those repetitive, common tasks for what does customer onboarding look like? What does it look like when a prospect goes from pre-sales into onboarding? There's often a lot of very repetitious, time-consuming tasks that could ideally be leveraged with this AI agent, especially if you're using native tools that Microsoft already has connected. Okay, guys, that's everything I had for you today. I hope this was helpful on getting started with AI agents in Copilot Studio. If you have any questions, though, be sure to comment below, or any feedback on the types of agents that you could think of after watching this video that you might want to create. Happy to help as we kind of go into this next era together. And I'll be doing a little mini series around Copilot Studio to dive deeper into some more specifics, like how you can integrate to Power Automate, build some more flows that way. That's getting a little bit beyond the surface level that we kind of touched on briefly today as well. But otherwise, I will see you guys next week.